Many of you probably saw Chad Kassem's video this week. In case you missed it, what he announced on YouTube is that Acoustic Sounds is going to be launching an Atlantic 75th anniversary series. So Atlantic Records, right? Been around a long time, covered a ton of different types of genres, was not exclusively jazz. And what this series is going to encapsulate is a little bit cryptic for the moment. So what has been said is that they're going to be releasing 75 different titles in honor of the 75th anniversary. Now, if you look at the Atlantic Records press release about this, what they kind of also allude to is that it may not be exactly 75, maybe closer to 90. I guess the idea was that it was hard for them to pinpoint exactly which ones they want to include, and they don't want to limit the series, right? No one wants to prevent themselves from making more money than they potentially could. So that is what they are doing, and in this, at least the initial announcement, they've said that there are, among the 75, there's at least 11 jazz titles that they are saying are going to be included, and it's very likely that there will be more to come. I'm not even going to talk about the classic rock stuff and some of the other genres, right? Because we focus on jazz here. So 11 jazz titles. So over the course of this video today, what I want to do is talk a little bit about the series, what titles are included in those 11, and then I kind of want to speculate if they were going to add additional titles, what might those be? So I have, my own preferences, but also maybe some predictions. All right, so before we go down the list, just a couple of quick things about the series. So they're all going to be 180 gram. They're all going to be 45 RPM, okay? So everything is going to be a double LP release, 45 RPM. There's actually one that I guess in 33 RPM is already a double LP release. So they're going to make it a 4 LP. But independent of that individual title, and by the way, that title, I don't even know what it is, but it's not a jazz one. Let's see. So independent of that, they're all going to be the double. They're all $60 a piece. And if you want to get a subscription to the entire series, it's $4,560. And what that gets you is the same numbered edition, I guess, for every single release. I don't know why that's important to people. I really don't. In fact, I'm not even really a numbered edition focused person, but I know there's lots of folks who are. So let's see what else. These are all going to be pressed either at QRP or RTI. They're all going to have gatefold jackets. Again, they're going to be numbered. And what they're saying as well is that the remastering may be done by a variety of people, but what they're saying is that it's always going to be somebody who's very experienced, right? So we're probably going to get some Bernie Grundman, we're probably going to get some Ryan K. Smith, maybe some Kevin Gray, but they're not committing to one person that's going to basically do it for the entire series. What they're saying is that different people are going to do it for different titles. All right, so for those 11 jazz titles that they've announced thus far, what they've done is each of those releases center around just two artists, John Coltrane and Charles Mingus. Now, I think we could probably, maybe arguably say that those are two of the most important musicians in terms of jazz releases that recorded for Atlantic, and I think it's a good place to start. They both have a bunch of titles and a bunch of very worthy titles to be featured in the series. So from that standpoint, I don't think I have any complaints with these initial 11. What I'm curious about is if they do add additional titles to the series, are they going to go for a sort of artist's entire catalog kind of perspective like they did with Mingus and like they did with Coltrane, or are they going to try to sort of honor some of the best of the label? So that remains to be seen, and I think the titles that we would expect would actually very much, it would be very different depending on which strategy that they took. Now remember, they don't have to add any additional titles that are in the jazz space to the list. They could just stick with that 11, but what they've said is that they haven't announced every title yet, and I think we'd at least get a few more. Obviously I'm hoping that we get as many as possible. All right, so let's start talking about the titles. So the first one that is appearing in the list, and I know that this is going to excite a lot of people, that is John Coltrane's Giant Steps. So this is one of the best albums that he ever released. I'm very excited that they're going to be including it. And again, 45 RPM for $60. I'm gonna say right now, I'm not gonna be buying every single title in this series. I'm not gonna be a completist with it, although I have pre-ordered one, and I'll tell you about that. But yeah, I mean, I think this is an obvious choice. Now, what I will say if you're wondering why buy this particular double LP 45 RPM edition, are there any other worthwhile editions that are out there? Well, so the answer is yes. In fact, the answer is yes for most of these. And I'll tell you a little bit more about each. So what I will say is that Electric Recording Company decided to put this out just last year, right? So in 2022, they put out their edition. It was like $600. I didn't get it, but I'm sure some people did, and I bet it sounds great. But $600, very different than $60. Otherwise, there's a 60th anniversary edition of this record that was put out in 2020. That was double LP, but I believe it was 33 RPM. What they did is they included some alternate takes to kind of fill out that second LP. And then there was a double LP 45 RPM edition in 2008 that was put out by Rhino, and that particular edition was mastered by Bernie Grundman. So the answer to the question, again, for this particular title, as well as for many of these, is that yes, there is another 45 RPM edition out there. And, this one was 2008, and it isn't that available anymore. So, perhaps it's time to have another. All right, so the next title that they announced was Coltrane Jazz, right? So this is a classic one as well. There's a couple of, this is an interesting one. I think half the tracks are Coltrane originals and the others are basically standards. There's a couple of different lineups actually on here. So you've got John Coltrane joined by McCoy Tyner, Steve Davis, and Elvin Jones. So, almost that Impulse quartet. And then on the other lineup, it's Coltrane, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and Jimmy Cobb. It's almost like a reverting to, even prior years, or even like a Miles Davis thing going on there, right? With some of these folks. So yeah, there's a couple different lineups, which I think makes this album not feel quite as cohesive, I would say, as some, but it's a fantastic album. So the last time that this one was put out in a sort of high quality form was in 2014, and that was by ORG Music. That edition was a double LP, 45 RPM, and it was mastered by Bernie Grundman as well. All right, so the next one up is My Favorite Things. A lot of people love this album. I would include myself in that list, especially that title track, right? So this has a very similar, actually the same lineup as Coltrane Jazz, at least one of those lineups. So you've got Steve Davis, Elvin Jones, and McCoy Tyner on this thing. So there have been other high quality editions. In fact, there was an Electric Recording Company edition in 2021 that was put out. And guess what? I bought it. I also sold it. And see, at that time, you could buy one of these ERC editions and sell it like almost immediately for more money. I kept it a little bit longer, and I don't think I lost money on it. I'll put it that way. I just didn't get the value out of it. I didn't. I think it was like the first ERC edition that I had ever even attempted to buy, and I was just kind of like, I didn't feel like I got the value. So anyway, there is that edition out there. There's also a double LP that was put out just last year, and that was mastered by Kevin Gray. It was just last year. So it's had a recent release, hasn't stopped Chad Kassem and Acoustic Sounds from wanting to tackle it again. And that actually is kind of an interesting point, because as we consider what other titles might be a part of this series, it's kind of open to anything, even if it was just put out, apparently. All right, so the next one up is Bags and Trains. So Milt Jackson and John Coltrane. Who do we have on this one? In addition to them, we've got Hank Jones, Paul Chambers, and Connie Kay. It's been a while since I've listened to this one. I don't think that it's necessarily my favorite Coltrane, but they're kind of including almost all of his titles that were put out on Atlantic. So I guess they were going to include this one. This one has been tackled in 45 RPM format in the past. That one was mastered by Bernie Grundman. It's put out in 2013. So it has been a while. And, for folks who love Coltrane, they're probably going to want to pick this one up. All right, so the next one up is Olay. And funnily enough, this is the only title I'm going to show you where I don't have an original pressing. In fact, this is a double LP 45 RPM edition that was previously put out. And I believe mastered by Bernie Grundman. I think he did this one. Yeah. So this is the version that was put out in 2013. That was most recent, say, high quality 45 RPM edition. So yeah, I think that this is an interesting, maybe a little bit more of an interesting pick by Chad Kassem, just because knowing a little bit about what he likes in music and how that dictates how he chooses releases. I just think that this is maybe a little bit more unusual because it's a little bit more adventurous than perhaps some of the other titles. But who knows? And again, it seemed like he wanted to focus in on, at least thus far, some of these musicians and their entire catalogs, right, for Atlantic. All right, the next one up, more Coltrane. This is Coltrane Plays the Blues. What I will say is that my copy is not in great shape, and so therefore it doesn't get many spins. Unfortunate, because it's great music. You've got McCoy Tyner, Steve Davis, and Elvin Jones on this one as well. And then I think that there's like, is there any substitutions? Yeah, well, I think McCoy Tyner sits out on a track or two on this release. So there was a double LP 45 RPM edition in 2018 that was mastered by Bernie Grundman, and I think this is the first time that they're kind of tackling it again. So yeah. Anyway, Coltrane Plays the Blues. All right, so the last John Coltrane title is Coltrane's Sound, right? A lot of people love this cover. There's a couple of other titles. Who did one? I think it was there's a Charles Mingus one that has the same, an artist did the same artist did the cover for that one. Then there's a Sonny Stitt one as well. Who's on this one? McCoy Tyner, Steve Davis, and Elvin Jones. So these guys seem to kind of follow Coltrane right across his Atlantic years. So yeah, great title. This one is really funny though, because just this year it was put out by Rhino Records, and that edition was mastered by Kevin Gray. I haven't heard it. It probably sounds good, but I don't know. Otherwise, the only other time I think that this has been tackled in 45 RPM format was in 2015, and that edition was mastered by Bernie Grundman. All right, so those were the Coltrane titles, and we're going to pivot to Mingus. But I'm kind of thinking, like, what's interesting about this is that this 75th anniversary series, what they are not doing, at least as far as I can tell yet, is choosing titles that have just not been released in a high quality format ever. And so, I guess that makes sense. I mean, here's the thing, like, these labels are in business to make money. And so obviously they're going to pick titles that they know will sell. And if some of these titles haven't had a 45 RPM format in, say, a decade, then why not? I think that there's this sort of expectation maybe from the collector crowd that, oh, you have to honor these like obscure titles that probably no one has heard of. And that's just not, that's not the approach that most labels are taking. And certainly that's not what Acoustic Sounds and Atlantic are doing with this series. It's not going to stop me though from suggesting that they include some of those obscure titles, and we'll get into that in just a couple of minutes. So let's run down the Charles Mingus titles. There's 4 of them. So the first one is Pithecanthropus erectus. Love this album. Absolutely love it. So let's see. You've got Jackie McLean, J.R. Monaros, Mal Waldron, and Willie Jones on this title. Really, really fantastic music. I'm biased. I love Mingus. But anyway, I'm excited for this one, and there's a possibility that I'll pick it up. So otherwise, if you wanted a high quality edition, there was a Speaker's Corner edition in 2018. I think Speaker's Corner is out of like Germany, but they put out a high quality edition, and then there was a Rhino edition in 2001. Don't know anything about that. The next one up is Charles Mingus's The Clown. So this is a fun one. There's some spoken word over a kind of a poem over parts of this, over the track The Clown, right? Otherwise, some of the music on this is like just really fantastic stuff. There's a great version of a Haitian fight song on this, for example. So you've got Curtis Porter on here, Jimmy Nepper, Wade Leger, I think is how you pronounce his last name, Danny Richmond. So I'm a big fan of this. I know some people are put off by that spoken word stuff, but I'm not. I love it. So this one was also put out by Speaker's Corner in 2016, and then there was a Rhino edition in 2001 as well. They must have done a series, at least for Mingus. So this was a kind of a funny one because I get to talk about blues and roots in basically consecutive videos. So you heard me just a couple of days ago say that this is included in my top 5 jazz albums of all time. And here we have a double LP 45 RPM format. What am I supposed to do? I had to pre-order it. It was one of the ones that you could actually pre-order immediately. Most of these that I've been talking through, you can't, because they only had like a handful or something that are available for pre-order right now. And Blues and Roots was one of them. So yeah, I put in a pre-order. It's one of my favorite albums. So yeah, that's what I did. Anyway, this one I don't think was put out by Speaker's Corner. I think the last sort of quality edition was by Rhino in 2001. And then the last Mingus title that it's included in the series is Oh Yeah. So fantastic cover on this one. Who do we have on it? Roland Kirk, Booker Ervin, Jimmy Knepper, Doug Watkins, and Danny Richmond. I love this album. This is one of my favorite Mingus titles as well. And again, that's from somebody who's especially a fan of Mingus. There was a Speaker's Corner edition of this just last year. And then it was also included in that Rhino series in 2001. All right, so now the fun part. This is when we get to speculate what might be included if they were going to expand this series. And one of the things I said earlier is that so far they're taking a sort of artist's catalog approach. In my opinion, and I'm incredibly biased when I say this, I think it's hard to talk about Atlantic Records without including Chris Connor. I made a whole video about Chris Connor and at least her Bethlehem titles, and here we have an opportunity for me to talk about Chris Connor again in no length, because I want to get to, I actually don't think that they're going to include Chris Connor. But I want to talk to you a little bit about her releases for Atlantic, and then I'll get into really some of the other titles that I think are just really exciting stuff. This could even almost be considered like a best of Atlantic type of video, because that's just how this is going to materialize. But I am going to talk about Chris Connor for just a second and show you some of the albums that, if it were me, I'd have like a whole Chris Connor series within the 75th anniversary series. So I love Chris Connor, and Chris Craft is a fantastic album. I think one of her best, and that would be fantastic if they included it. She was always surrounded by, not always, but it was often like I would say a medium-sized orchestra sometimes, and in my opinion, the best of her albums are the ones where it's like just a trio or a quartet that supports her. But I really love her stuff regardless of the format of the backing band. So Chris Craft is a fantastic title that was put out on Atlantic. You can tell I spent a lot of time digging through all my Atlantic and taking all the covers out. It's going to be a mess to put all this back together. So here's another great one. He Loves Me, He Loves Me Not, right? This is an early one. Love that title. You've got Free Spirits. Fantastic cover with these, we call them jazz dots. There's so many jazz records where you see like this sort of dot sort of icons on it. I'm trying to think if this was one of those titles that was done by a famous cover artist. I'm not entirely sure, but anyway, fantastic cover on that one. Fantastic music as well. You've got Chris Connor's Witchcraft. Really like this one as well. Ton of tracks on there, so they're probably short. You got a Jazz Date with Chris Connor. Sure, they're not going to include any of these, guarantee it. Chris Connor sings the George Gershwin Almanac of Song. This is a double LP. Chris Connor sings Ballads of the Sad Cafe. I'll say this, if you go into like the vocalist section, like pop vocals or whatever your local store calls it, go to the Chris Connor section. You're going to find her stuff on Atlantic. I think you could probably pick it up for, pick some of these titles up for $1 or $2, honestly. My favorite out of all Atlantic titles that she put out is her first, and that is simply this self-titled one. This is a beautiful, beautiful record. On this one, she's actually surrounded by an even more impressive band, or really a couple of different lineups. On one of the lineups, you have John Lewis, Barry Galbraith, Oscar Pettiford, and Connie Kay. And then there's some of the tracks are by a little bit of a larger orchestra. You've got Zoot Sims in there, and some other folks. I just really love this one. I think if you're gonna go anywhere, at least after her Bethlehem titles, start with that one. You also got Chris in Person. That's a fantastic title. And then Chris Connor, I Miss You So. This is not all of her titles for Atlantic. Those are just the ones that I have, and I'm always looking to to get some of those additional ones just because for me, anything Chris Connor. All right, so now that we're done with Chris Connor, a little bit rapid fire, I'm going to go through a bunch of titles. I have a ton of Atlantic. I have a couple of IKEA cubes of Atlantic, and so I didn't want to show you everything. I did make an effort, outside of the Chris Connor stuff, I did make an effort to try to pick the ones that I thought would be maybe just a little bit more interesting, but still there's a ton of them, so I'm going to do this kind of rapid fire. Maybe use this as a reference the next time that you're thinking about what titles to add to your Discogs wish list. So Art Farmer recorded a few albums for Atlantic, and he's a pretty well-known jazz musician, and I think could be a worthy addition to the series. So you've got, probably not a live title. I don't think that they would make a live title into a 45 RPM edition, but I'll, going to kind of go through some of these. So you've got Live at the Half Note. So this is the Art Farmer Quartet featuring Jim Hall. So it's just a quartet format, and it's Art Farmer and Jim Hall. Jim Hall's a guitarist. You also have Steve Swallow on bass and Walter Perkins on drums. So no piano on this one. It'd be an interesting one. It's a fantastic title. So you also have another one that's Art Farmer Quartet featuring Jim Hall, and this is To Sweden with Love. And then the other Farmer title I wanted to bring up is Sing Me Softly of the Blues. So this is a great one as well. I'm trying to think if this one's a quartet format. It is. So it's actually Farmer, Steve Kuhn on piano, Steve Swallow on bass, and Pete LaRocca on drums. Fantastic album there. Otherwise, so if you're thinking about, again, musicians who are otherwise well-known and could be good sellers in the series, there's Yusef Lateef. So he put out some great albums, including the Blue Yusef Lateef. You've got the Complete Yusef Lateef. And then you also have his album, Yusef Lateef's Detroit, and I guess subtitle Latitude 42, 30, longitude 83. Missed the degrees in there. Sorry about that. So yeah, he's got some titles for the label. He also did Little Symphony much later. This is like the last one that they would feature. Not because it isn't good. It's just it's very different, and there's no way. It's way too late in Atlantic's catalog to even consider doing something like that. All right, so let's run through some more, and then at the very end, I'm going to give you my 5 top choices. I'd say if they're going to add any of these jazz titles, give you my top 5 that they could add to that list of Coltrane and Mingus. So a lot of people don't like the Modern Jazz Quartet. They think it's too sleepy. This album for me is just their best album that they ever put out. Fontessa. You can find this almost anywhere. It's always going to be cheap, and for some reason, it just doesn't go for much money, and people don't really give it much attention. And guess what? The recording engineer on here is Rudy Van Gelder. So Chad Kassem seems to like music that sounds good, and if the original tapes are in decent shape, could be a possibility. So next one up is Duke Pearson's Prairie Dog. This one could be interesting. Duke Pearson's great. His work for Blue Note was fantastic. Who's on this? You've got Harold Vick, Jimmy Spalding, Bob Cranshaw, Mickey Roker. Then there's another lineup that includes some other folks, including Johnny Coles, George Coleman. Duke Pearson's great. I think it could be fun to dust this one off. That one's becoming a little bit more collectible than it used to be. Another one is Art Blakey with the Jazz Messengers and Thelonious Monk. So this one I think is likely. I think this one would sell pretty well just based on Messengers with Monk. So the lineup is Blakey, Monk, Johnny Griffin, Bill Hardman, and Spanky DeBrest. I think that there's a decent possibility on that one. So a curious title that they haven't announced is The Avant-Garde, John Coltrane and Don Cherry. So to my earlier comments about trying to include the entire discography of Coltrane and Mingus, what's conspicuously absent is this title. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe they haven't gotten the rights to it. Maybe they're considering it. Maybe Chad Kassem doesn't like it. Next one up, this is a fantastic album. John Lewis and Sasha, is it Distel? I think that's what it is. Afternoon in Paris. So on this one, you've got Kenny Clark, Percy Heath. I was about to say Percy Faith. Connie Kay, Pierre Michelot, and Barney Weiland. I want to say that this one wasn't first put out on Atlantic. I think it was put out on a French label first, but I don't think that means that it wouldn't be a candidate. I know it was recorded in Paris, so it's possible that Atlantic doesn't own the tapes to that one. I'm not really too sure. The next one up is Teddy Charles Tentet. So I know a lot of people sort of sleep on Teddy Charles. Maybe they're aware of his prestige work, but he always surrounded himself by great musicians, and his albums are almost universally great. So this cover, incidentally, was designed by Bert Goldblatt, who's the same photographer who adorns my walls. So on this, in this Tentet, you have Gigi Grice, J.R. Monaros. Let's see, there's Don Butterfield on tuba, George Barrow on baritone sax, Jimmy Rainey, Mal Waldron, Teddy Kotick, Joe Harris, and Saul Schlinger. Yeah, I mean, I know this is a little bit of a larger format, but I actually find this one to be very, very worthwhile. So another one is Night Music. George Wallington plays 5 originals and 6 standards. I'm a big George Wallington fan, again, especially because of, well, I don't know. I mean, obviously his prestige work is great, but this is a great one as well. And actually, Night Music is another example of a Rudy Van Gelder engineered session. So, you know, sounds pretty good. All right, so moving things along, Freddie Hubbard, he recorded a couple of albums for Atlantic, and I think it could be exciting to include some of those. So you've got High Blues Pressure. This is an interesting one. I mean, Hubbard wasn't with Atlantic for that long, but he put out some great stuff, including this title. On the track, Can't Let Her Go, not only was the track written by Weldon Irvine, but Weldon Irvine actually performs on this album playing piano with Hubbard, and that's a, you know, it's kind of exciting piece. In terms of the obscure, rare things that they would never actually include in the series, I think right near the top is this title. I'm actually going to take it out of the sleeve because it's such a dark cover and I want you to be able to see it. So this is titled Wednesday's Child. This is Patty McGovern and Thomas Talbert, or Talbert, maybe he's French. So yeah, this one is just, it's tough to find, and I don't know, it's a little bit of an unusual entry sort of in the Atlantic catalog. I don't even know if I would necessarily call it exclusively jazz as much as it is a little bit more of the pop vocals kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, they would never include that. It's just that it's also a title that really hasn't had many reissues, and it probably needs one, just probably not in this series, right? So that other Freddie Hubbard title, or one of the other Freddie Hubbard titles, sees a couple of others, is Backlash. So, you know, this could be an interesting one for them to include. It's a little bit obviously later. You can almost, you know, sort of forecast it, right, with even the font. So another title in that kind of rare category, similar to Wednesday's Child, is Tony Fruscella, I think is how you pronounce his name. So Tony Fruscella was a trumpet player. I'll tell you who's on this one. Where is it? All right, so Alan Eager, Danny Bank, Chauncey Welsh, Bill Triglia, Bill Anthony, and Junior Bradley. So kind of like an obscure cast of musicians on this particular album. This is one of those, though, that is just, it's so desirable. It sounds great. It hasn't had many reissues, and I know people would want it to be included, and they'd want some of these rare titles to be included. I just can't imagine that they would actually do that. There's too many other titles. They're trying to probably fit all the Led Zeppelin stuff into this series, right? So Roy Ayers' Virgo Vibes is another title. They could do Stone Soul Picnic too, right? I don't think I pulled that one out, but I do have it. But you know, Roy Ayers has some great stuff. Fantastic Jazz Harp of Dorothy Ashby. This one was just included, right, in the wasn't it just included in the box set that just came out? So, you know, it's not going to stop Chad Kassem from reissuing it, but you know, it's a fantastic album. Next up, Warren Marsh. So this is a great album with a great lineup. Philly Joe Jones, Paul Chambers, Paul Motion, and Ronnie Ball are on this title. Warren Marsh. He is a underrated musician. This one probably ranks a little bit higher maybe than some in terms of its likelihood of making the series, and that is Nirvana by Herbie Mann and the Bill Evans Trio. A little bit, I say likely, less for Herbie and more for Bill. This is a fantastic album, though. I think in terms of Herbie Mann's overall body of work, I think this is one of the best albums that he's on. All right, here's an obvious title or an obvious choice, but it just recently had like at least one reissue. I think Vinyl Me Please put one out, right? Shape of Jazz to Come by Ornette Coleman. You know, I think it would be hard for them to, with a straight face, put out the 75th anniversary series and not include this title. Maybe they're just giving it a little bit of breathing room from the last release before they announce it. Who knows? All right, so kind of a sleeper title, I'd say, is Shelly Mann's Boss Sounds. So this is a live date. It's a live date. And this one you can come across in like stores for a couple of bucks, or maybe more reliably like $10. This is just phenomenally recorded, phenomenal music, and it's such like you would never expect it, right? Because a lot of people kind of ignore Shelly Mann, but that's a worthwhile title. I don't think it's going to be included. And then I think the last one that I wanted to kind of highlight or show you is Here is Phineas, so the Phineas Newborn Jr. This is a Burt Goldblatt cover as well. This is a title that was just featured in Vinyl Me Please too, but it's fantastic. It sounds great, and I think it could be interesting to include it. In the lineup, you also have Oscar Pettiford and Kenny Clark, and then Calvin Newborn as well. This is also one of those, there's not that many titles that Rudy Van Gelder did the engineering for Atlantic, but this is another one. So I think it's, if we're thinking about what titles might, have a decent chance at making the list, like Chad Kassem's not going to pick anything that doesn't sound really, really good. And I think that we can have higher confidence with some of these Rudy Van Gelder sessions, right? So I think that those probably might be, elevated just a little bit higher on the list. All right, so I didn't show you everything I have. I think I have another 30 or so Atlantic albums, but I kind of did want to close with, those titles that I think are probably the most likely to be added, if they're going to add anything at all. We don't even know if they're going to add any jazz titles, but if it was my preference, I'd go for those more obscure titles, right? I'd go for Tony Frisella. I'd go for, Patty McGovern, Chris Connor, right? I'd lean in more into MJQ. But anyway, it's not up to me and my taste. It's about what's going to sell, for better or for worse. So, I would say, and these are probably going to be obvious, but if there was going to be 5 titles that they were going to add to that list in the jazz space, I think that they would add the Avant-Garde, so John Coltrane and Don Cherry. I think, even though it just had a release, I think Shape of Jazz to Come would be included in there. Don't know the last time that had a 45 RPM. I think Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers, the Thelonious Monk. I think this would be an easy one to sell, recognizable names. There's a lot of people who would grab that, not even people who are not necessarily purely in the jazz space, right? In my mind, so I still think that this could be likely. I think this is MJQ's best record. They put out a bunch for Atlantic. I think it would be irresponsible not to include at least one title, and if they included one title, I think it should be Fontessa, especially if they did it in stereo, 45 RPM, such a quiet record. That thing would be beautiful. And then the last one, and this is based on name recognition as well, I would say that they would do the Herbie Mann and the Bill Evans Trio. Here's the thing is that this could easily just be also called Bill Evans Trio with Herbie Mann. I think he is the leader on this, and actually I'd have to take a look and see what tracks they're playing. They don't play any Bill Evans originals, so I guess this really is just a more of a Herbie Mann title. But they just sound fantastic on this album. I think Bill Evans would sell it to people, even folks who are not as familiar or don't necessarily trust Herbie Mann albums. Although I personally think he had some great stuff. So if I was a betting man, those are the 5 that I would add to the list that they've already put out. And as I mentioned, not everything is available for pre-order. What they're doing with these 75 or so titles is that they're going to release 2 of them every month for the next, I can't do math, several years. So it's going to be over a period of time. Not everything, therefore, is available for pre-order, but one of those titles it is Blues and Roots. And so I'm, I had to pre-order that one. As far as the rest of this list, or even the ones that I've, hypothesized maybe they would be included, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to go for. I probably will go for Giant Steps, some of these classic ones, and I'm going to really be crossing my fingers that they're going to tackle some that haven't had recent 45 RPM additions, just to give us something a little bit new. But, I can't speak for the broad sort of audience and fans of music. These are just my tastes. So I'd be curious if anybody out there has their own favorites that are on the Atlantic Records label that they'd like to see included in the series. Or just any feedback on what this series is about, because I know there's some folks that are all about it, some folks that are really nervous about it, especially with the title Olay, because what it means is that for them to split it up in over 45 RPM, that they have to split up one of the songs across multiple sides, unless they come up with some other type of creative solution. So that's going to be a little interesting. But in any event, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much as always, and hit like, subscribe, do all that stuff, and I'll see you later.